Welcome folks to the Monash University Make Your Mark Career Compass webinar. I'm your host Gary Ryan from Organisations That Matter. It's a pleasure to be working with you here tonight. I'm also the author of What Really Matters for Young Professionals, which is in fact our special prize that you'll be able to get for completing the evaluation survey at the end of tonight's webinar. Let's get straight into meeting our two panelists for this evening's webinar. So let's welcome Alaynna Elliot, who's the Senior Manager of Human Resources at Mercedes-Benz Australia Pacific. Welcome, Alaynna.
Hi, Gary. Hi, everybody.
How are you? Would you like to just give everyone a bit of a quick overview of your role at Mercedes-Benz, Alaynna?
Sure. So I'm responsible for recruitment as well as what we call HR development. So that includes all of the learning and development for our employees in Australia and New Zealand. I also do a bit of what we call business partnering and support some of the teams that we have based out in our Mulgrave head office. So that's my role in a nutshell.
So Alaynna, no doubt that has kept you very busy, although it's important to share that you've very specially giving up your time tonight because you might have started a very special leave time in your life just last Friday. Is that correct?
It has, yep. So whilst that has kept me busy, I've also just commenced maternity leave as of Friday last week, so I'm taking about 8 months off to obviously look after a new challenge. I'm not quite sure what I'm in for yet, but
look, you'll find that your role at work is a great preparation for managing at the home with a new child. So we certainly wish you all the best. And folks, this just shows the passion of Monash University alumnus to be prepared to be able to come online and share their insights and help you with your personal careers. So we really thank Alaynna very much. We've also got online tonight Danny Ong. So Danny Ong is the Multicultural Employment Consultant, Employment and Career Development at Monash University. Welcome, Danny.
Yeah, hi. A pleasure to be here.
Would you like to explain to us a little bit about your specific role for the Employment and Career Development Department at Monash University, Danny?
Yeah, so our office is basically helps students to be career ready and prepare for future jobs and meet their career aspiration. And my role specifically helps international students to actually secure employment, not just in Australia, but overseas as well. And I got a sort of responsibility for work rights as well, so help them to, in terms that they're exploited or, issues with contract and so on. And I'm also a Monash alumnus, so I did all my degrees at Monash, and I'm just about to finish my PhD as well at Monash as well. So know Monash pretty well.
Fantastic. In fact, I have also completed 2 postgraduate degrees and some doctoral level subjects as part of a Doctor of Business Administration program at Monash University too. So we're all clearly a big part of Monash University. So thanks again, Dan. In fact, you mentioned your role about international students and helping them, or international graduates rather, get jobs overseas. And in fact, online on our call tonight, we have folk from no less than 8 countries online with us. So we've got folk from the USA, Latvia, Botswana, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, China and Pakistan. So welcome folks to those very far distant places to Melbourne, Australia. Thank you and welcome to whatever time of the day it might be for you for joining us this evening here in Australia. What will we be doing tonight? What's our focus? We're going to look at personal branding, resumes and cover letters for you, interviews and some really important tips for getting successful with your interviews, specific comments for some international student graduates along the way. We'll also be talking about work experience and the role that plays in helping you with your careers, and also hearing from Danny and Alaynna with regards to their own work experience and their own journeys. We'll be talking about graduate programs, changing careers, and of course the personal insights, as I've already mentioned, from Danny and Alaynna. What we'd like to do now, folks, for those of you that have joined us, we'd like to just participate in a very quick poll for us, please. We'd like to find out your thoughts about your current employment status, please. So if you'll see on your screen that you have an opportunity to check one of the boxes. So are you working part-time or casual and looking for work, not working at all and looking for a permanent role, working full-time but looking for a new career change? What is your result? So we're seeing folks responding here at the moment. So we've got nearly half at this point in time. I'll give you 10 more seconds to respond. And let's have a look at the results. So we can see here that we have got 44% are working part-time or casual, etc. We've got 30% not working at all and looking for a permanent job, so that's about a third of our attendees tonight, and just under a third, just over a quarter in fact, are working full-time but looking for a new career opportunity. So we've got the whole gamut there, Alaynna and Danny. Any specific comments about those results from either of you two?
I think it's really great to have a mix, and certainly well, I hope some of all the content is relevant to anyone, no matter what sort of your employment status is.
I think that's very accurate.
As well. I think,
yep. Yes, Danny?
I think it would be good to, I guess, it will hopefully, like what Alaynna said, everything should hopefully will be relevant. And I think that there are a lot of opportunities out there, and it's just getting the right opportunity down your road, I guess.
That's correct. Okay, well, let's get into some content to help those folk as they're going through this journey. So let's look at some personal branding and what do you think or suggest our attendees should do in terms of their personal branding? Danny, let's hear from you first.
I guess personal branding is something like the word personal implies it needs to be about yourself. It's not just about other people. So I think a lot of us, we tend to have this habit of trying to copy what other successful people have done. And I think it doesn't really apply to everyone because everybody is just so individual in terms of personality, experience, and knowledge. So I think personal branding, you need to look at bringing out your own innate expertise and your character into your career rather than just trying to copy somebody else.
Okay, and Alaynna, what are your thoughts? Sergey says from a personal branding perspective, what should graduates do to help them get started with their careers?
Well, I think certainly as a graduate, you just need to really understand. I know this sounds probably a bit cliche, but who is you? And that can be things like your values. So do you value creativity? Do you value working in a team? Those are some really important characteristics that really will impact upon your brand. And when you understand that question of who is you, you are far more authentic when you come across either through an interview or whether it's a networking opportunity. But that's probably what, from my point, and really just to back up what Danny said, is it's that authenticity. Because certainly as an employer, I really want to understand who you are as opposed to see 5 different clones of the same, or who you think I'm looking for. So
you've both said that it's really important to be consistent and be who you are, and Danny's also mentioned about, don't try and be somebody else. What are some things that people can do to discover who they are if they're not really sure?
I guess they need to actually self-reflect and think about what they have accomplished and what they have done. I mean, in my line of work, I do speak to a lot of students and graduates as well. And one of the key things what I found was that if you look at a resume, a lot of people tend to be overemphasized on, what are the tasks they do, but they never look at, how these tasks and how this experience actually shape their personality and even shape their identity in work. And it's quite interesting. I mean, always people may assume that you can be any person you want in the job market, but even though how big the job market is still quite small because word does get around about what kind of person you are as well. So I think to actually illustrate, to actually have a good think about what you actually can contribute to the company, for example, and based on that, think about what experience you could actually bring in and also what kind of character. If let's say this job requires teamwork, for example. What previous experience do you actually have in terms of teamwork? It's not just doing teamwork within your degree, but teamwork working in either through work experience or through volunteering would be quite helpful.
And Danny, in terms of the international students, graduates' perspective, from my experience of working with them, often they don't recognise the advantage they've got by being multicultural, in that they've come from their country, studied in a completely different country, and yet because they look around at university and notice lots of other students are doing the same thing, they don't actually recognise that that's an advantage. So how is that reflected in the traits, if you like, or the self-branding do's, if you like, for international graduates?
I think the best example, I mean, before this role, I was actually working for the university in terms of managing a lot of international projects in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. And I mean, this is just observing from other countries. One of the key things I found was a lot of researchers or a lot of students, in fact, try to mimic what Western theories are about. So, for example, if you look at our what we studied at Monash, majority is actually based on Western theories, like developed in the US or the UK. But a lot of students, in fact, are not confident enough to stand up to say, "Hey, that is in fact not consistent with my country's cultural practices." So, like for example, if you look at a very easy theory like Maslow hierarchy of needs, where we say that in a Western country we say that physiology needs, the basic needs, is the most fundamental needs of everyone. But in China or in any Confucianist or Asian culture, we see social needs as our fundamental needs, because by meeting social needs we are quite sure that we could meet our physiological needs. So in the same case as when applying for jobs, a lot of students tend to ignore their cultural competency, and some of them in fact see their cultural competency and knowledge as a potential obstacle to get a good job. But you need to actually embrace what you have in the first place. So like for example, if a Chinese student, Indonesian students, and an Australian student or graduate were to look for a job, the only distinctive trait that all three have is they got a unique cultural competency and knowledge that potentially could benefit the company. So I think that's something that if let's say you do have an understanding of your own host country culture, like in whether you're Australian or any home country, and you can actually duplicate that and really combine it with other countries' culture, I think that's a skill that employers are really appreciative of.
Thank you. And as already some participants have been doing, please feel free to type some questions into your text boxes as we're going along, and we'll feed them through to Alaynna and Danny. And Danny, you were just mentioning before about also the don't do's with personal branding, and you mentioned duplicating another person's brand and sort of taps into creating a false persona. And as you've just been speaking now, don't underestimate your value, whether you're a domestic student here looking for work in Australia or if you've been an international student. Alaynna, Prue asks, do I have to be active on social media sites to get noticed, and how does that relate to personal branding? Have you got any comments on that, please?
I think it's a really good point that I was going to bring up in terms of this personal branding, and I often get asked, personal versus professional branding. Should there be a difference? And I think what is really important, particularly with social media, is, and obviously there's the more social aspects, so there's Facebook, Instagram, but then you've also got quite professional sites in LinkedIn. I think it's important to be active in LinkedIn, just from even if it's just an awareness of who's out there and what are the sorts of positions that people hold, for your own research. But coming back to the branding question, and maybe I suppose this is probably a don't, is I wouldn't put anything out there in social media that I wouldn't want an employer to see. You may be quite well versed with your privacy settings, but it is really important just to make sure that there's some consistency there between personal and professional. I don't, as an employer, have an expectation that certainly the people in my team have two very different personalities. They should come to work and be who they are. I hire them for exactly who they are and what they add to the team. So there shouldn't really need to be a separate persona they need to maintain, because that gets quite exhausting. So I would say that, you know, in terms of social media from a very social side, be cautious about what you put out there, but certainly from the professional social media, get out there. I mean, there's no harm in having a profile. I certainly know that before, often I've recently appointed a new HR advisor to my team, and everyone I interviewed had said that they had looked me up on LinkedIn before they got to the
Absolutely.
interview. So it's a pretty powerful tool, and certainly one that you know, is relevant in today's employment market.
And look, and I think some people are concerned about privacy issues, but the reality is that these are public domains, these social media tools and platforms, and employers these days, as you've described, you know, look up potential candidates, certainly the shortlisted ones, and the candidates themselves also look up the folk that might be hiring them and try and find out a little bit about the organisation. So you know, your comments just completely align with the do section for personal branding, which is be consistent. And as you've said, Alaynna, like, be consistent as one human being. It's difficult enough being a single human being, let alone trying to create different personas for different parts of your life. So that's absolutely fantastic advice. Let's look at now cover letters and resumes. What are some of the things that we've got on the screen here, Alaynna, that you'd like to talk through for people so they have a bit more understanding of what we mean?
I think for me the biggest thing and biggest do is actually read the job ad. I will tell you that any job ad I've personally written or my team has written is based off the job description. So therefore, everything that we're looking for is in that job ad as a tip. You know, we'll use similar words, whether it's for experience, qualifications, competencies, attributes, those sort of things. They're all in all that massive text that's the job ad. So it's really, and I'll be quite candid, it's not up to the applicant to decide whether they don't meet one of those criteria and they're still going to submit their application. We will absolutely screen based on the resume and then the job ad. So if it does ask for something quite specific and you don't have it, I'd move on to the next job ad. So biggest tip is the answers are all in those job ads.
When your team are looking at resumes, and it's important that we are candid, as you've already said that you are, Alaynna, is how long do your team spend looking at the cover letter and the initial part of the resume in order to work out if it's worth continuing to spend some time on it?
I would say the first look would be about 30 seconds to a minute. It would be based on, you know, those key high-level, you know, what would you call it, criteria of the role. So if we ask for an accounting degree, we will look for that first and get rid of anything that doesn't include that. So that doesn't take very long.
No.
And I'm sure that's probably your experience as well there, Gary.
Absolutely.
We might receive, you know, hundreds of applications for one particular role. So you really want to make sure that, you know, the relevant information is, you know, stands out. So, you know, I know personally from my resume, I've got my many Monash qualifications up there, and they're first off. So I know that if the job asks for a postgraduate qualification in HR, that's the first thing they're going to see. So I'm already in through that round. Then they'll start looking at the next level, which is the relevant work experience.
And in terms of if you have 90% of the skills, should you still apply? So Jess is asking us, if you have 90% of the skills, should you still apply?
I think it comes down to, depends how the job ad is worded. If you've got the skills and there's maybe one or two that you haven't, skills or experience you haven't got, absolutely. But if it does ask for something quite specific, like a qualification, I really wouldn't. I'd move on to the next one. So qualifications tend to be quite specific to job the job content and sometimes even the job size, which relates to salary. Skills and experience, they're a little bit more grey, and that's something that certainly if you've got 90%, I'd be throwing my hat in the ring.
Okay, so Catherine also asks, is in terms of cover letters, is a shorter letter better, or do you need to be longer?
Yes.
So yes.
Yes, the shorter letter is better. I think my experience with reading cover letters, and this goes for resumes as well. It's quite hard to be concise, and that is a skill in itself. In the cover letter, what we want to see is very briefly some of the motivations and how you articulate your suitability to that particular job you're applying for. Honestly, that is maybe a paragraph or two.
Okay.
In terms of your resume, 2 pages, double-sided, so that's 4 all up. If we're going through 200 resumes that we've already culled from, say, 300, really we're not going to have time to go through the 6, 7, 8-page resumes. So it needs to be concise and to the point, and really highlight your achievements and your experience that links to the actual job you're applying for.
Yeah. Finally, just before we continue to move on in this section, Jing asks, if the job has specific GPA requirements which I did not reach, should I still apply for it?
That's an interesting one because it's not probably an Australian, it's not as relevant in the Australian job market. It will be for, say, I'll relate it to an experience with graduate recruitment. And certainly what we call industry-based learning, which is, or co-op, so that's students that are still studying undergrad. If we have a credit, so the equivalent, I'm trying to think of the equivalent GPA, 3.5 maybe, GPA, yes, we will screen based on that. So if you don't meet it, it's unlikely your resume is going to be put forward to the next stage.
Okay. So, Danny, have you got any comments for Jing's question there?
I think it's quite important to actually ensure that you got all the key points there. I think it's not whether how long or how short, I think it's the quality that actually counts. And I guess one of the things is how much, you can't actually squeeze everything, and a cover letter in fact is not just a summary of a resume. And I think a lot of resumes I see for students, in fact, they attempt to actually duplicate what was written in the resume, which sort of defeats the purpose as well. So I think this cover letter, in fact, needs to be very concise. It's just like a story or summary of story. I think if, let's say, if you look at your resume as a movie, it's more like a 2 minutes trailer to about telling the employer about yourself. So I think one of the key things is after writing a cover letter was to get someone to look at it, and whether that someone after reading your cover letter could actually understand the type of experience or what it can offer to the company as well.
Yes, and you've mentioned that it's important to be truthful. So if people don't have relevant experience, then don't make it up. Like, be honest about your work experience. Danny, do you want to just talk about the 3 levels of experience in terms of your work responsibilities, required tasks, and what you have improved or achieved from those tasks?
Yeah, so one of the things, if let's say, I like to use the example of waitressing, for example. So a lot of people would think that waitressing is a very low-level type of job that they couldn't actually highlight in their resume. So one of the things normally I see what students say is waitressing, waiter at this specific restaurant. My work responsibility is to serve the customer, handle cash, and that's it. And I mean, as a lot of employers, in fact, some of the employers we engage with, they did highlight the fact that they are not interested about the responsibility, but in fact what these students actually learn from those experience. So like, for example, if let's say the work responsibility is serving customer, the required task is bringing the plates out, or laying out the utensils, so on. But the question is, if you do this kind of task, what do you actually say about what kind of skill you have learned? So the other thing about waitressing is that potentially you'll be handling money and cash as well. And one of the things a lot of accounting students, in fact, do waitressing jobs while they're at university. But so far, the resumes I see, I don't see anybody who say that, if an employer asks me to handle cash, it means that they trust me as a person, individual, so I'm trustworthy. I also a meticulous person because I ensure that the cash balance out. For example, traits and experience that, in fact, employers, prospective employers are very appreciative of if you can highlight that in a resume. But students often just go to the task and that's it. What does the task tell me in the first place?
Okay, fantastic. I have an interesting question just before we move on from Alaynna, who says, if you don't have experience, then which types of jobs do you look for? And it turns out that Alaynna has worked in Colombia for 3 years before doing her PhD, but now she wants to find work that's related to her PhD, but she doesn't have experience in that space. So we've been having a little bit of a conversation in the background there. So Danny, any specific comments for Alaynna?
What is her PhD on?
I don't know yet. So Alaynna, you will have heard that. So if you wouldn't mind just typing that through to us, that would be great. Environmental science. Thanks, Alaynna.
Okay, so I think PhD-wise, I'm doing my PhD, and one of the things about PhD is something that is quite specific, but yet potentially could be articulated into specific careers as well. So using myself as an example, my PhD is on how PhD students balance their work experience, which is quite ironic, I say myself. But and everybody would assume that my PhD topic would actually means that I'll be working in the university environment. But in fact, part of my I can actually change my research or my expertise into work-life balance literature or work-life balance type of role outside academia. So environmental science or environmental research is also another area that I think potentially depends on where you want to take on. It could be straight down to the path of commercial, commercial pathway, like for example, working at, engineering related type of roles where there's a strong focus on environmental sustainability nowadays. I'm not sure about what's your exact topic, but I'm just throwing some ideas. Maybe potentially work for the government and so on. But for PhD students, it's very important that you actually publish, because publish actually is not just for academic reason, but publish also it indicates that there might be some professional, potentially a professional link to your research as well, because some of the professional bodies or companies do read academic journals to look at whether there's a potential R&D in that area or research commercialization in that area. And the other one is, of course, link up with your supervisors, whether they are back in Australia or they're back in Colombia, to look at what are the best opportunities or whether they could offer you any networks, because I think supervisors also play a quite significant role in that.
Okay. Thanks again, Danny. And just one last question for Alaynna on this topic. Putu asks, where on the resume should you speak about what you have achieved from the tasks and responsibilities that you have done, and should you write a small paragraph under each job?
So the way I would recommend, I would spend more time describing some of those achievements than really the tasks and responsibilities. I think certainly what I look for is I can generally understand pretty standard positions. So if it is, personally I used to work at Hungry Jack's, so or Burger King for those not in Australia. So I think you can pretty much assume some of the tasks, but what I would emphasize with that is what were my achievements. So again, keeping it back to the theory of we need to be, it's about quality not quantity. We need to be concise. You want to think about what are the key things you want to get across to this person reading your resume that's going to make them want to meet you. So it's not about spending time describing that you did cash handling and I did customer service and some of those, keep that very simple, maybe 1 or 2 lines, but then talk about some of the achievements. And again, I wouldn't, and this is probably going a little bit beyond the specifics of that one role, but it doesn't need to be every single, if you've had a number of roles, I would try and limit it as well, so we don't need to see everything from primary school all the way through. So take it, certainly if you've got relevant work experience, take it from when it's relevant. So my resume now doesn't include my tenure at Hungry Jack's, albeit I can talk about how relevant it was. But again, it's really about what somebody wants to read that's relevant to the role. So.
Yeah, so I think resume needs to be contextualized basically for the job itself. So like just on the question about PhD, for example, your resume will be a bit different from other people's other people's resume if you're applying for academic position, because in academic position they'll be more interested in education qualification, and second most important thing is your publication rather than your work experience. So some of the academics jobs in fact place academic publication much higher than work experience itself. So in that line of thought, you need to actually, if you're writing about your work experience for academic position, you need to really think about how does the professional experience potentially contribute to your academic achievement. It's the same thing for the other jobs as well. You need to think about, how is it relevant to basically the job that you're applying for.
And that's exactly the message, folks, is to make sure that it's tailored to every single role and that it reflects your achievements and experiences. We've heard both Danny and Alaynna explain. What are some of the don't do's that you think folks should be very clear about? And Alaynna, we might start with you again.
Certainly I would, if you have had some relevant professional work experience, I'd avoid using that company or that organisation's jargon. If you've I've worked for a couple of large automotive companies, and they love an acronym. I think absolutely everything I do in my role could have an acronym, but I can't assume that somebody reading that resume will understand what those acronyms mean. So you do need to articulate your resume so that you can give it to your parents and they would understand what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So you want to keep the easily understandable. I would avoid putting personal information, so things like your birthday, your marital status, how many kids you've got. Honestly, they're not, certainly in the Australian labour market, they're not necessary, and I just would never want, I mean, I can speak for my team and my organisation, but I can't speak for every employer out there to say that you just wouldn't want any underlying bias to creep in, certainly to your application. So make sure that you're including information that's relevant. The other thing I would just emphasise in terms of coming back to this point, so don't ignore any of the selection criteria. So take your time to really understand what the job that you're applying for is and does, and obviously then you can easily articulate how you're going to suit that job. I have, so the organisations I've worked for, because you can all stalk me on LinkedIn if you'd like, are Holden, so General Motors and Mercedes-Benz. The amount of resumes I've received over my time applying for BMW and Ford, I would say that just don't make your application so generic that it's just a matter of inserting the company name, because sometimes your find and replace might just miss one, and it really won't go in your favour.
That takes the 30-second review of the resume down to 2 seconds, doesn't it?
It does.
It's brutally honest, but folks, that's the reality. Let's move on to interviews now. And Rio asks, is overselling yourself a bad idea during a job interview? Well,
I think there's a degree of confidence that is really good to have in an interview. But what I would sort of bring that back to a little bit is your preparation. So before any interview, I would hands down recommend that you prepare for. You may not know the questions, and to be honest, it's not always going to help you if you know exactly which question they're going to ask. From my perspective, a really good interview just feels like a long conversation. I've really got to know that person, they've got to know me, the role, the company, and we've really just, you know, had a connection during that 45 minutes to an hour. So in terms of being overselling yourself, that's what you're there for. You're there to sell yourself, to explain and articulate how you match the job and you're the one we're looking for. So preparation is key. I think in terms of overselling, I would be prepared if you're going to put achievements on your resume, be prepared to be asked questions about it. So it comes back to making sure what you put on your resume is to start with the truth, and you haven't embellished either, because usually we'll want to delve a little bit deeper into some of the things that you've put down. So if you've oversold yourself on your resume and you aren't able to back that up in an interview, that's probably where it's not a good idea.
Okay, today, in fact, Lou Adler, who's the author, this is today on LinkedIn, Lou Adler, the author of The Essential Guide for Hiring and Getting Hired, has written an article suggesting that there's one question that all job seekers should ask, and that question is, can you tell me what the person in this role needs to do in order to be considered successful? So this is the interviewee asking the panel that question. Again, the question is, can you tell me what the person in this role needs to do in order to be considered successful? What are your thoughts, Danny and Alaynna, on that question?
I think personally that question might work both ways. First, the positive way is that potentially it shows that you got a willingness to develop yourself within the company. So you're looking at a long-term relationship with the company, and you really want to be the best in this role if you're selected for the position. On the other hand, this is potentially from a non-Western culture. I guess this question potentially would be some employers in the Eastern culture may think that this this person may be a bit of a smart aleck because there's some sort of notion that he's trying to challenge or think much future ahead. It's just like you haven't been selected for a job, why you ask those kind of questions. So I think there's a cultural context to this, but personally I think this question is fantastic in a way that it really shows that this person might be this potential candidate is quite confident about what he knows, what he wants as well. So I think it's one of those questions that I'll ask at the end of an interview.
Okay. Alaynna, your thoughts?
I would say my first comment to that person that asked me that question is great question. To start with, you've prepared yourself to ask some questions. So I suppose very briefly, another thing that's really important, not only in terms of your preparation of what are your experiences and achievements, but what are some questions that you can ask that will demonstrate your interest in the position and the organisation. So you sort of want a double hitter question where not only does it give you that good information, but it also demonstrates and puts you in a light that you want to be seen. So I think those are the sorts of questions I would much rather be asked than probably what I would say is a more superficial question of, do I get to, can I park my car here, or, I know it sounds trivial, but those are the sorts of questions that come across in the assumption you've already got the job. Questions about, what does good look like, what does it take to be successful. They demonstrate more of an interest, a genuine interest in the role, and that impresses me.
Yeah, they're more like a higher level question. And I mean, as we've already said too, probably the last 2 points on the screen at the moment that folk can see is that being confident, being okay with saying, look, I don't know. If you're asked a question you genuinely don't know, in an interview, it is okay to say, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. And then you might just briefly describe or refer back to things in the resume or other experiences where you've demonstrated that you're a good learner, that you learn things quickly. And the last point about dressing appropriately, is there anything we need to add at all, Danny and Alaynna, on that point?
I think that was coming from a point I made earlier, just about your brand. So I generally would say that present yourself in a way that's congruent with your brand, and also congruent with the organisation you're applying for. So certainly, with my organisation, if you've ever been into one of our lovely dealerships, our sales executives are very well presented. They will have probably a very well pressed suit, a shirt and a tie, and I would expect anybody coming for an interview with our organisation to be dressed in a similar way.
Yes.
That said, we're not an advertising agency and we're not a creative, I suppose, in that field.
Yes.
So that's where it's relevant to actually have an understanding of the organisation you're applying for and what's maybe going to be appropriate for that. And that's, again, connecting your personal brand, how do you want to be perceived, with then what impression are you going to make when you first walk into that organisation.
And once again, do your research.
Absolutely.
We've just got Ran Sun has asked, how do I prepare for phone interviews and what's the difference from face-to-face interviews?
Well, in terms of our process, a phone interview is generally one of either could be a 3 or a 4-stage interview. So typically as a process, we would screen resumes first, then we would conduct a phone interview, then we would meet for a first round face-to-face. There may be a second round interview, which will generally mean that you're down to the top 2 or 3 candidates, followed by reference checks, and then an offer is made. So certainly if there's a phone interview, you've got that far, and I think that's really good. What you need to, I suppose, have a think about is, first of all, the environment that you're taking the phone call in. It's okay to say that now's not a great time. I would still be very polite in how you articulate that message. But, we would much rather speak to somebody over the phone when it's a good time, when each of us can hear each other and that you're fully able to, I suppose, converse with us over the phone. In terms of preparing for a phone interview, it's going to be quite brief, and it's really going to either tackle on motivations for the role, so why are you interested in applying for this position. We also will generally want to understand salary expectations at that point, because salary expectations can be one of the other screens for progressing your application. So I would just make sure that you really have understood and prepared why you want to apply for the role. And that's just about your motivations and, again, some of those high-level points about why you are suitable for it.
And just before we move on to some specific points for international student graduates, in terms of some of the don't-dos, again, some very common sense things, but it's amazing how common sense can get forgotten in this process. But don't talk for the sake of talking. Be aware of any personal habits like fidgeting, folks. Both Danny and Alaynna will have experienced some stories about that over time, no doubt. So learning how to breathe, in fact, just slowing your breathing down can be really important. And the last point there about forgetting to familiarise yourself with your resume before the interview. So the interviewers are telling you what you wrote in your interview is a big no-no. You want to make sure, because you've tailored your resume, that you know exactly what you put in there and the order of what you've put your experience in, so that you are very coherent in really that your resume and yourself look like one person, which goes right back to that personal branding of being consistent that both Danny and Alaynna mentioned at the start. Danny, some of your extra points specifically for international student graduates?
I think one of the things is, I mean, this applies to all graduates as well. One is to actually keep track about what job you apply for as well. Just now I was talking about telephone interview, and the worst thing could happen is when someone call you for telephone interview, you say, can you remind me the job that I apply for? So it actually reflects very badly on that, you've been self-selected. But a lot of students, because a lot of graduates, in fact, they mass apply for jobs sometimes, and they lost track, and I think that also restrict the number of opportunities. And this is actually quite prevalent among international student graduates because they just wanted to get a sense of what the industry is for, so they actually applied quite a fair amount of jobs when they graduated. But one of the key things, of course, international students within Australia or even sometimes overseas, you need to actually ensure that you got a valid visa to actually work in Australia or overseas as well. One of the things employers do feedback to us is it's not necessary for you to actually highlight what type of visa you are on, but at least to ensure that you got a certain duration of visa that could cover you at least for that employment, especially short-term employment, because potentially the employer might be able to sponsor you for a visa, not just in Australia but overseas as well. And I think students need to be very international students. It's a fact that international students or international graduates in Australia or even returning back to home country, they may have a competitive advantage over local students in their home country or even sometimes in Australia. But you need to be very strategic in terms of applying for jobs, in the sense that you need to think of what you could in fact contribute to a company, potentially between countries or their international relations. And you need to look at potentially what industry and what kind of business you want to work for example. So when you apply for companies, one of the things was to actually in fact look at the website of the company to see whether this is the type of jobs that this is the type of companies that you want to work for, and also whether you could actually have some tailored skills or experience that you could offer to this company, rather than just mass sending application for jobs. This is actually noted for those who currently do not have a permanent position or not working but looking for permanent jobs. And I think the other one that a lot of international graduates tend to ignore is small and medium-sized company, because everybody wants to work for the big companies. But the question is, how many employees can the big company hire? So one of the things about accounting students that I spoke to, and it's quite interesting, they wanted to always work for the big four companies, so like KPMG, Ernst & Young, PwC, and Deloitte. And the funny thing is, I like to ask them, like, do you actually know what does KPMG means? What kind of company it is? How does it work? KPMG came about, and none of them actually know about it. They just want to work for them just because they heard good things about them. And I think because of that, they do have a skewed view about small and medium-sized companies. And in Australia, small and medium-sized companies, in fact, hire about 90% of the employment market. And that's something that I think international graduates could tap into, especially if they do have a skills that they could offer these companies, like, for example, potential export to their home countries, or linkages and things like that.
Okay, that's just wonderful advice. Thanks again, Danny. Now, I'd like us to we're really closing in on the end of our time together now, folks. Our time has absolutely flown by, and we've got a wealth of information from both Danny and Alaynna. Now, I've got a question, one last question for each of you, and I'm going to ask you to be nice and succinct, please. Now, one of the questions comes from Jessie, and actually it's just Jess, sorry. And Jess says, should you include, and this question's for Alaynna, okay? So should you include every experience in your LinkedIn profile? Do you think there should be a hierarchy, and are some experiences less helpful than others as it relates to your LinkedIn profile?
So is the question, do I include everything on my LinkedIn profile or on my resume? Sorry, just to be clear.
It's specific to LinkedIn profile.
All right, so LinkedIn, obviously that follows a chronology, so that gives you the order of it. I treat LinkedIn as a professional platform. Again, it sort of comes back to what's relevant. you won't find my experience at Hungry Jack's, and I worked at the movies after that, Village Cinemas. They're not on my LinkedIn profile, yes. Albeit some of those experiences, maybe earlier in my career were relevant. So it pays to make sure that your LinkedIn profile is always up to date, and as you progress through your career, you do critically look at those experiences and understand, really, are they as relevant to me now as they were once before.
And one rule of thumb might be the 10-year rule. If things you were doing more than 10 years ago, you ask yourself, are they relevant? Now, if they are, keep them on there, and if they're not, you might take them off. So a lot of folk use that rule, and obviously you might extend that the further you get into your career. So thanks very much, Alaynna, for that. And Danny, a final question for you coming from Putu, who asks, do you have any advice, and we've probably got enough time for one real direct piece of advice, do you have any advice for Australian graduates who are looking for work abroad?
I guess the key, it actually depends on the industry that you look at and also which country you're looking at. I think the best way to start is to actually look at how your degree is being, which kind of industry you're looking at and the specific region that you are going to apply for, and to see whether there's any Australian company operating in that specific areas, because I think if you go through their website, you have an appreciation of what the industry as well as what kind of position or what kind of roles would be relevant in there. So for example, one of the project I'm working on at Monash currently is to link Australian companies with Indonesia, and you'll be surprised that there's a lot of Australian companies that actually wants to invest in Indonesia and vice versa. So there's a couple of Indonesian companies coming in. So we're doing a business forum to actually link both of them up. And one of the things, these are the type of events that you need to actually attend, because one thing is, of course, you could actually expand your professional, you could expand your networks, you could actually listen to what are the key discussions about specific areas that you'll be keen to work on, and potentially have a reflection of what kind of skills you can actually bring into this discussion as well, because I think this is some of the ways that potentially can be noticed, because especially for Australian graduate who want to work overseas, you may not have the necessary networks to link you up with such opportunities, and you need to actually have a earful on maybe potentially foreign newspapers as well, because some of the positions they offered there may be suitable for you, you're eligible to apply. And of course, was to ensure that you got the right visa or you got the right connection to actually ensure that you could work in the country. So for example, if you're interested to work in Singapore, I would recommend you to go to the Singapore Ministry website or Manpower. So for Australian, you can apply easily for a 3 years work permit in Singapore for a job that's aligned with the country needs. So you need to actually do your research about that, and from the research, identify the key areas of potentially companies that you want to proactively engage to get a job in that line.
Yes, Putu has said that it's actually Indonesia, so we might get you two to connect offline if that's okay, to follow up with Putu.
Yep, definitely. Yep, happy to talk to him. Yep.
That's just fantastic. Look, we have got one bonus question, because I do know that it does affect a lot of the audience, and Alaynna, I might get you to answer this. Lloyd asks, would employers view my goal to be an entrepreneur negatively or positively?
I think that as long as it's relevant to why you're, as an employer, why we're having a conversation, I think it's fantastic. I don't think companies have, well, I hope not all companies have such a traditional view of job for life, and certainly any value you can add to my organisation, albeit maybe not for forever, because it's probably depending on the role, maybe not as much of a great fit longer term for an entrepreneur to work for a really large multinational, but as long as you can sell that message about why it's relevant, I think it's a really positive career aspiration. The fact, and I'll turn it around, the fact that, Lloyd, you've got a longer term view sets you apart. Absolutely, because that is one thing that probably don't see enough of, is that longer term view on what, what career goals and aspirations you've got.
And the reality for a lot of entrepreneurs is that you need to get 5 to 10 years of sort of corporate experience to really be able to leverage, in many cases, that entrepreneurial spirit that you've got, because you've got to understand how that world works to be able to leverage back into it. That's not true for everybody going down the entrepreneurial path, but in many cases it is. If you want to be entrepreneurial in terms of the space of management, for example, you've got to get management experience to understand what it's like to be able to act as a consultant or whatever the case may be going forward. All right, we will need to move on to just the closing action section and taking action. So there's some action we're really keen for you to take, folks, and that is follow the advice that has been provided by Alaynna and Danny tonight, and make sure that you do what you've learned tonight. The key 3 to 4 insights that you've picked up, possibly for each section of personal branding, preparing your cover letters and resumes, and for your interviews. Make sure that you do that advice, put it into action. We've spoken a lot about LinkedIn. Each of us are more than happy for you to join with us on LinkedIn, but you've got to be on LinkedIn to do that, so just go to linkedin.com and sign up. If you connect with me, I'm happy to send you a link to a webinar that I conducted, a video of it regarding LinkedIn for university students. So I appreciate that you're graduates now, but there's still a lot of those step-by-step instructions in there that are relevant for graduates as well, in terms of how to set up your LinkedIn profile and how to leverage it. So absolutely join the Monash Alumni in brackets official LinkedIn group. That's what you've got to do once you've signed up to LinkedIn, or if you're there already, go and join the 13,700 fellow Monash University alumni that are already there and participate in the conversation. Complete the evaluation survey of this webinar to go into the draw to receive my book, What Really Matters for Young Professionals. It's got some chapters in there about transferable and employability skills, as well as how to identify your own personal values, which Alaynna was talking about at the start of the webinar, so that you can really understand your personal brand. So you might like to go into the draw by completing that evaluation survey for that. And regularly visit the Alumni Careers Services web pages at www.monash.edu.au/alumni/career. And if you do all of those things, you're going to find that you will get the best benefit from our webinar tonight. Finally, it's really important that I'd like to thank both Alaynna, who, as we heard at the start of the evening, is on maternity leave. So we really appreciate, Alaynna, you giving your time to us this evening. We wish you all the best. No doubt you'll absolutely be a terrific mother and enjoy that part of your experience. So Alaynna, thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
And Danny, once again, thank you for your wonderful time. Folk are very, very lucky to have someone with your passion and expertise working for Monash University, and clearly you're quite happy for folk to contact you through email, etc. And once again, Danny, we thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And folks, finally, we'd like to thank all of you for joining us. It's very important that you do this. Once again, this is being recorded, so you can access it from the Monash Alumni website that we've noted to you. And Christina Vukasic, who is sitting in the background at this webinar, we thank Christina for her wonderful work in enabling this webinar to happen. So it's time for me to say goodbye and thank you, and we look forward to sharing the webinar recording with you soon. Bye.